So this seemingly innocuous ability that we have to be content creators, to reach people at scale. In other words, we can make content, we can produce content cheaply and easily, we can get it out to people. Um, this ability actually is having some really important ramifications for all of society. For example, newspaper industry is really struggling right now. In fact, in America, uh, 24 of the top 25 newspaper chains in the country are all on the verge of bankruptcy. What they're finding is that they thought they were in the news business, but it turns out that they were actually in the advertising business. And the problem for the newspaper industry is that they're actually bundlers of information, right? They have a little bit of news, a little bit of sports, a little bit of weather, a little bit of entertainment, the local TV schedule, and so on. But the problem is that each of those bundles can be done better, usually, by somebody else who specializes in just that niche. For example, who does weather better? Your local newspaper or weather.com? Who does sports better? The local newspaper or the national or international sports site that focuses on just sports? But who does entertainment better? Your local newspaper or those gossipy entertainment blogs that we love to read, and so on. By the time you pull out all the different pieces of the newspaper that are better done by somebody else and usually are available online for free, there's not much left other than maybe local news reporting and perhaps some deep investigative journalism. And the question is, how much are we willing to pay for that? And the challenge is for newspapers to find a new economic model that supports what's left. Television is also struggling. There used to only be 3 to 5 main channels. Now what we're finding is through the advent of cable television and so on, is that there were hundreds of channels. Then the internet came along and we actually now have millions of channels competing for our attention. We're finding that many of us would rather watch kitten videos on YouTube than what the major broadcast companies are pushing out to us. And so, like in the States, for example, the number one television show is still the number one, but it has about a third or a fourth of the number of eyeballs that maybe it had several decades ago when there was nothing else competing for our attention. Magazines are struggling in the same way that newspapers are. There are very few magazines that are thriving right now. Those that do typically fill very specialized niches, but your sort of general purpose magazine is typically barely staying afloat or is hemorrhaging money right now. Because much of what they provide is also available online for free. When's the last time you bought a music CD? The record companies have finally figured out that it's a bad business strategy to sue their own customers. But the fundamental dilemma that they're facing is that they no longer can rely on those revenue streams of dollars where they forced us to buy entire albums, 90% of which maybe we didn't want. And they're having to adjust to a revenue stream of nickels where we buy only the songs that we want, and then we arrange them in playlists of our own choosing, and so on. So fundamental changes for the music industry, and they're having to rethink all of the models. Music is thriving right now, but the major music companies are struggling to survive. We have more music than ever, but it's now broken up into smaller niches, and we can find each other without having to go through the major corporations. Radio is struggling through the same issues as television. So there used to be just a few radio channels. Then we invented things like digital radio or satellite radio. Now we have online streaming radio through sites like Lala and Last.fm and Spotify and so on. So they're very much in the same boat as television. The printed book is on its way out. What we're finding is that the affordances of the digital word vastly outweigh much of what we can get on paper. And as much as I hate to say that, because I love to curl up with a paperback on the couch or in the lounge chair at the pool or at the beach. But the bottom line is electronic text is searchable. It's can be reformatted in different ways for people with visual disabilities. It can be combined with other formats so that it's more multimedia and interactive and so on. So Amazon is already reporting, for example, that due to robust sales of its Kindle device and the Kindle app on things like iPads and iPod Touches and iPhones, that the number one selling version of any book that it has is now the electronic version. In other words, if they have an electronic version of the book, it's already outselling both the paperback and the hardback versions on Amazon, which is, of course, the world's largest bookseller. So what we're seeing is that even for fiction, not to even mention nonfiction reference resources, is that things are going electronic very, very quickly. Um, the movie theaters are trying to figure out how they can persuade you to drive halfway across town or maybe halfway across the province um, and pay big money for you and your family to go see a movie on the big screen when many of us now have the ability to watch that movie online or download it and watch it anytime we want on our boxes at home where we can watch it on the big screen in our basement and save significant dollars as a result. So the movie theaters are also figuring out what their new revenue streams are going to look like. And so far, what they've done is relied on gadgets like 3D, or they've simply ratcheted up prices, but they're barely staying afloat. Paper maps are on their way out. We can see that through tools like Google Maps or GPS devices and so on, that the days of the paper map are numbered. Many of us still rely on paper maps because of our comfort with them, but bottom line is fewer and fewer of us use these every single year. And we're using directional services and so on instead. When's the last time you used a travel agent? We have access to the same information that they do. We can make reservations like they do and so on. We can find places to stay or eat and attractions to see. The days of the travel agent are numbered. Many of them are already out of business. Banking and finance are already heavily computerized. If economic ripple occurs in Greece, the entire world feels it these days because we're so interconnected. But it's also our own personal finance and banking and money management. So we can manage our stocks online, we can do online banking, we can use tools like ATMs instead of people, bank tellers, to do our work. And so we're creating sort of the self-service economy where, mediated by software and technologies like ATMs and kiosks, we can do much of the work that we used to pay people to do for us. Medicine and health are also changing because of these digital technologies and this new information landscape. When's the last time you diagnosed yourself online? Doctor, I think I have malaria. Have you been out of the country? No, not really, but I have these symptoms. Look. And so it's not just the rich availability of medical information online that's now offered to all of us, but we're finding that tools like telemedicine are really helpful. So, for example, in rural areas, it's hard to find specialists sometimes in the area that you need. They're basically housed in the big cities, and it's not affordable for them to come out to smaller rural areas. But we can now hook you up with a doctor via a webcam where we have a local nurse, say, and if they need to do something like stick a fiber optic cable down your throat, the doctor can see what's going on and then tell you what kind of medicine you need or what treatment you need or whether you need to come to the big city for further work and so on. So we can actually connect you with doctors and experts all over the world using these video conferencing capabilities. So whether it's robotic surgery or telemedicine and so on, medicine, of course, is also being radically reshaped by this new information landscape. The Postal Service, at least in the US, is hemorrhaging money. I think it's lost about $6 billion last year. It's predicted to be bankrupt by the end of this year. It's going to be completely out of money. We're sending fewer and fewer letters, of course, because we're doing more of our communication electronically, Facebook, email, instant messages, and so on. The real estate agents are sort of in the same boat as the travel agents. They're trying to justify their 6 or 7% or whatever they get for their work when we have access to the same publicity and marketing tools that they do, when we have access to the same market information that they do as shoppers and so on. Politics will never be the same now that the internet is here. You can look at past elections just to see the huge role that tools like Twitter or Facebook or online fundraising communities are having on the political process. Universities, of course, would love for you to come to campus, but bottom line is that online education is booming all around the world. And we're finding that through the combination of online learning spaces, maybe open educational resources and so on, that the traditional role of the university as a place where you have to go to get your knowledge is rapidly eroding because we can now get our knowledge and our credentials in other places. The number one university in the United States used to be Ohio State University with about 85,000 students. The largest university in America is now the University of Phoenix, which is a largely online university with about 500,000 students. What all of these entities have in common is that they're all related to information. And they're all information-oriented segments of our society. They're around mastery of information, dissemination of information, scarcity of information, and making a buck off of it, and so on. And of course, they're all being radically reshaped by this new information revolution that we're all living through. And of course, the challenge is that K-12 schools, primary and secondary schools, are also information-oriented segments of society. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves as primary and secondary educators, and even tertiary educators, why would we think that we would be immune from these significant transformations that are radically reshaping every other information-oriented segment of society? And I think the easy answer to that is that we're not going to be immune, that we can't somehow live in a bubble, that we're, schools and universities are special places, but we're not that special. We're not going to somehow be immune as information-oriented institutions from the information revolution that we're all now living through.